There is a cognitive pattern that separates every man who has ever built something significant from every man who spent his life preparing to build it. It is not intelligence, it is not resources, it is not even courage in the way most men understand that word. It is the specific wiring of a mind that has stopped waiting for conditions that will never arrive. Right now, somewhere in your life, there is a move you have not made, not because you cannot make it, because you are waiting for something to make it feel safe first. The permission of the room, the validation of someone whose opinion you have decided matters, the arrival of circumstances that feel ready enough. None of those things are coming. The man this video is about stopped waiting for all three, and the distance between him and everyone who kept waiting became the measure of his empire. This is not a video about confidence. Confident men wait too. This is not a video about discipline. Disciplined men wait too. This is a video about a specific cognitive rewiring that makes waiting structurally impossible for the men who have it. Not because they are braver, but because they are wired differently at the level of how they process permission itself. In 1517, a German monk nailed a document to a church door that challenged the most powerful institution in the Western world. He had no army, no political backing, no guarantee of survival. Every rational calculation available to him said wait. He did not wait. Not because he was reckless, because he had already processed the permission question at a level that made external permission irrelevant. Martin Luther did not act in spite of the absence of permission. He acted because he had stopped requiring it entirely. Today on Ironframe, we study exactly how that cognitive shift happens and what it produces in every man who makes it. Martin Luther was not a revolutionary by temperament. He was a monk, a scholar, a man who had spent years inside the very institution he was about to challenge. For years before 1517, Luther had been developing a theological position that directly contradicted official church doctrine. He did this work privately, in his study, in his reading, in the long, quiet hours that most men fill with social validation and consensus. The rational case for waiting was overwhelming. The church could excommunicate him, could destroy his career, could end his life. Every person he trusted advised caution. Luther did not ignore the rational case. He processed it completely. He understood every risk clearly. And then he discovered something that changed the calculation entirely. That the permission he had been waiting for was not available from any external source. The church was never going to give a monk permission to challenge the church. The institution was never going to authorize its own examination. The room was never going to tell him his understanding was correct before he had proved it. When Luther understood this, truly understood it, something changed in his relationship with the permission question itself. He stopped asking whether the church would allow this and started asking whether his own understanding required it. When the answer to that second question was yes, the first question became irrelevant, not suppressed, not overridden by courage, simply irrelevant. The external permission had been replaced by something that required no external source to activate. On October 31st, 1517, Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg. He did not know what would happen next. He did not need to know. The action was already internally authorized long before the hammer struck the nail. That internal authorization, that moment when his own understanding became sufficient and the external question became irrelevant, is precisely what we are going to break down today. Luther did not become a different man on October 31st. He became a man operating from a different internal source of authorization. That distinction between the man who waits for external permission and the man who has found a sufficient internal source is the entire psychology we are studying today. Principle 1. Permission waiting is not caution. It is a cognitive loop that feeds itself. The man who waits for permission does not wait once and then act. He waits, the permission does not arrive. He concludes the conditions are not yet right. He prepares further. The permission still does not arrive. He concludes he needs more preparation. The loop compounds. The waiting generates evidence that more waiting is required. No amount of preparation produces the permission the waiting man is looking for, because the permission he is looking for does not exist in the form he is seeking it. Real-world example. The man who has been refining his business plan for 18 months and still cannot identify what additional preparation would make him feel ready. The preparation is the waiting. The waiting is the preparation. The loop has no external exit. Principle 2. The permission-independent man does not eliminate risk. He relocates it. Most men believe that waiting reduces risk. It does not. It relocates risk from the risk of acting to the risk of not acting. And the risk of not acting compounds invisibly, while the risk of acting remains visible and therefore feels larger. Luther did not eliminate the risk of challenging the church. He relocated it from the risk of acting without permission to the risk of not acting against his own understanding. The permission-independent man has performed this relocation consciously. He knows the risk of inaction is real and growing. The risk of action is real and fixed. He chooses the fixed risk over the compounding one. Real-world example. The man who stays in a career that is slowly destroying his potential because the risk of leaving feels larger than the risk of staying, when the risk of staying has been compounding for 3 years and the risk of leaving has not changed. Principle 3. Permission-independent men source their authority from their own understanding, not from the room's acceptance of it. Luther's authority for the 95 Theses did not come from the Church's acceptance of his theological position. It came from his own sustained engagement with the primary texts over years of private study. His understanding was the authority. The Church's acceptance was irrelevant to whether the understanding was correct. This principle is the cognitive mechanism behind every act of permission-independent action. The man who acts has already resolved the authority question internally. He is not asking the room whether his understanding is valid. He has already answered that question himself. The room's opinion is downstream of that answer, not upstream of it. Real-world example. The man who has done the work understands the market and knows his product is right, but waits for an investor's validation before believing it himself, when the investor's validation is supposed to confirm what he already knows, not replace the knowing. Principle 4. The cognitive shift from permission-dependent to permission-independent is not a personality change. It is a single realization applied consistently. Most men believe that permission-independent action requires becoming a different type of person. Bolder, more aggressive, more risk-tolerant. It does not. It requires one specific realization applied consistently that the permission being sought does not exist in the form being sought. The church was never going to give Luther permission to challenge it. The market is never going to tell an entrepreneur his timing is perfect. The room is never going to tell a man his idea is ready before he has proved it. Once a man genuinely realizes that the specific permission he is waiting for is structurally incapable of arriving in the form he needs it, the waiting ends, not through willpower, through the collapse of the waiting's premise. Real-world example. The writer who is waiting for confidence before starting, when the confidence only arrives after starting, making the waiting for confidence a wait for something that can only be produced by the action the waiting is preventing. The world will keep offering you the structure of waiting. It will frame the absence of permission as prudence. It will make the room's silence feel like wisdom rather than inertia. Every system you operate in was built by people who needed you to wait for permission. Because the people who did not wait for permission built systems of their own and stopped being available to other people's systems entirely. The permission you are waiting for is not late. It is not coming in the form you are waiting for it. The man who built everything you admire did not receive it either. He stopped waiting for it, not through a dramatic act of will, but through the specific cognitive realization that the waiting itself was the obstacle, not the absence of permission, the waiting. The move you have not made is not waiting for the right conditions. It is waiting for you to stop requiring conditions. Next week on Ironframe, we study the specific moment when Augustus Caesar made the single most consequential decision of the ancient world, and why the psychology behind that decision is the same psychology behind every man who has ever changed the conditions of an entire system from the inside. Subscribe if you want to think at that level. I will see you then.